Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast. Sam here, just a real quick cover note on this podcast. We sat down with Colin Sheehan a while back. Colin's been someone we've been really looking forward to getting onto the podcast for some time. He is a fascinating character. Colin's just finished 15 years as the head coach of the Yale Bulldogs. He's been involved, in Yale right through his collegiate days. He's hugely respected in his field. He is, however, also deeply involved in golf developments. He was a driving force behind Ohoopee Match Club. He's got a number of other projects on the go at the moment. He's been involved in the restoration of Yale. He has one of the largest collections, of vintage postcards of American clubhouses. He's into match play golf. He's into British golf club culture. He's hugely invested in golf course architecture. He's an all-round fascinating character. Some of the signal on the podcast is a little bit sketchy. It's probably a little bit worse at the start of the pod, but it kind of gets into it. So I would just stick with it. It's a superb episode. What Colin says more than makes up for any lack in audio quality. You can trust us on that. And without further ado, it's over to the podcast. Enough about me anyway. How are things with you?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I love what you guys are doing. I love the enthusiasm. So delighted to be on. I came on a trip to the UK, the Yale golf team in March of 1996, and we flew overnight, piled into a van. Our coach drove like Mario Andretti down to Sandwich. We didn't even get out. We pulled into the parking lot. He got out. He briefly chatted with what we later, found out was the secretary, but two old guys in tweed jackets. And then we continued, we motored in the little, the coach out to the 10th tee, and we went out in singles off the back, without a meal, just straight there, and it was love at first sight. 10th hole is one of my favorite holes on links golf, and the very next day was a proper 36-hole match against Royal Cinque Ports with morning foursomes, afternoon foursomes, big lunch, toast to the queen, and after 2 days, it was just incredible love and admiration, and just I've never stopped wanting to enjoy that feeling of those first 2 days of golf in the UK. Everything about it, and all I've ever wanted to do is just nudge American golf along to be more like the Brits. It's just how it goes. Yeah. I sometimes the way all the sort of skinny English kids in the '60s loved American R&B and blues, and they. And Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, they couldn't get enough of chess records, and I feel like there's something about falling in love with the culture of the across the pond. One, it's mutual admiration that goes back and forth, and so I feel that way about British golf. There's not a single thing about it that we shouldn't try to emulate, and it wouldn't in one way or another wouldn't make American golf better.
Wow. Well, that's a hot start to this podcast, Colin, because to a primarily British club audience, they're going to love hearing that, particularly from a man of such distinction in the game over in America as well. I mean, it's quite hard to summarize what your role is in golf. Obviously, you've been a hugely successful team coach at Yale, which has just come to an end, I believe. Was it 15 years or so? But you just seem like an all-round golf guy. I think even with the Yale stuff, there's loads of other projects going on. You talked there about being on site at Castle Stuart. There's developments. There's the Outpost Club. You're obsessive sort of historian of golf clubhouses in America, from what I understand, from the little bit you're just a complete golf nut, right?
Well, OCD can be a weapon. I was recently, I just sent to Robert at RSG, last month, a few weeks ago was the 100th anniversary of the second Walker Cup, first in the UK. It was at, May 18th to 19th, St. Andrews, USA team, luckily backdoored a win on day 2. But, I spent half a day putting together a huge slideshow of this because 3 of the 10 members of the U.S. team were from Yale. I recently convinced the USGA to let Yale buy replicas of the original Havermeyer Trophy and the Walker Cup to acknowledge the sort of contributions of Yale golfers 100 years ago. But to answer your question, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool golfer, just like many of us, like you. I fell in love with the game as a 10-year-old at a diving 9-hole public course in Fairfield, Connecticut. Was lucky to work in the bag rooms and caddy at various private clubs in Fairfield, where came with Monday privileges, which I couldn't believe. And it helped. And then it led to a chance encounter with David Patterson, a Paisley native, born in the late 30s, who grew up on sugar rations in post-war Britain and was eventually a club professional and a professional, and competed in the 1960 Open Championship. Troon.
No way.
Led to me getting recruited by him, and in 1993, it sort of changed my life. He was the former pro at the Country Club of Fairfield where I was working, and I was a senior in high school, and I would work, I'd work Fridays from 3 to 6, and as soon as the shift was over, I'd try to play 18 holes after sunset. And one day, when it rained, they just sort of, on the day of, they just told me they didn't need me. They weren't letting out carts, and so I would always go out and play in the rain. I was always inspired by that story of Tom Watson as a kid. Always, whenever the weather was bad, he would always use the opportunity to play. I love playing in shite weather, and and there was this kind of guy shows up, Dave Patterson, and whatever reason, on a fall Friday, he too came to play in the rain, and he started asking me questions about, sort of explaining to him I was a senior and I was player then. I was playing well with him, and I was interested in playing in college, and I had my sights set on like a school like Rice in Texas or William and Mary and somewhere in the Sun Belt. And by the 5th or 6th hole, he eventually says, I'm coach of the Yale golf team. I'd like to send you an application. And New Haven is only 30 minutes from where I grew up. And in 1992, it had a reputation, was kind of notorious for being a city that was down on its luck, a little dodgy. I didn't really have, it didn't even dawn on me about going there, but I went on a visit that winter and fell in love with it, met the team, and spent sort of a night or two on campus. And it was the dead of winter, and the old coach took me on a tour of the golf course that was covered in 1.5 feet of snow. He drove me around the service paths, but he was amazing, and I'm eternally grateful to him. Sort of, he always took advantage of the NCAA rules that allowed you to do an overseas tour, a quadrennial overseas tour. Every 4 years, Yale still to this day has a spring recess of 2 weeks. And it's fascinating to me that he would take the team on a fortnight to the UK, a week in England in March, and a week in Scotland. And I know Americans think it's completely daft that you would go over there that time of year, and yet that's the thick of the sort of college, university golf season, which to me is fascinating. That it's like the winter term is the golf season.
Yeah, it's strange. The varsity side, they play their matches pretty much exclusively in the winter, really, and then it all builds towards that big fixture really in April or whatever.
Yeah, or late March even, right?
Yeah.
So explain to me, it's all based off the old cricket calendar, I guess. But that trip was like a revelation. Playing Cambridge in an all-day, morning and afternoon foursomes matches at Royal Worlington, 4 trips around Worlington in one day, and in freezing cold weather, and the camaraderie and the social element of it. Match play sort of only. We couldn't play a more different format, unfortunately. I understand it's what you need to do to have 15 compete against each other in a tournament over the course of 2 days and 54 holes. It's thoroughly boring to sort of be grinding out a medal score for days on end, when so much rather just be playing head-to-head matches and having them, there's no substitute for that. So that trip changed my life, and I was already a passionate golfer. I've always loved history. I was a voracious reader of golf literature. And by the time I graduated Yale, when everybody else was generally going to follow sort of path to Wall Street or law school, I one way or the other, I knew I was going to. I had my sights set on sort of pursuing golf architecture, restoration work, where I did to do, and fell in my lap to become a magazine editor in New York City out of college. Small magazine, small sort of high-end lifestyle magazine called the Golfer, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed traveling and writing, and nothing like the freedom you have those first sort of 8 years you have of college, sort of attached, living sort of rent check to rent check, and I sort of always jokingly refer to it as a poverty jet set lifestyle. But yes, so but it led to me eventually getting in touch with Mark Parson, and in 98, 99, 2000, I saw a lot of new courses part of the working at the magazine, and a lot of them were real estate projects. A lot of them were uninspiring. And then to me, the course that, but it was exciting to see things like Bannon Dunes happening. It was definitely, there was something building there with these really terrific courses were starting to come online. They were still the exception. And I always love telling the story is when I finally came around to seeing Kingsbarns in July of 2000, brand new. It basically came online during the Open Championship. And it was clearly one of the best new modern courses that anyone had built. But I was equally, if not more so, impressed by the clubhouse, the restraint of the clubhouse. The course that good, to have a clubhouse that modest,
so small,
to me was fascinating. And that led me to want to find Mark Parson. I was like, I tracked him down, and it took a while, and he was in Cabo San Lucas on the end of the Baja Peninsula, and we became very good friends, and we had countless phone calls and spent sort of hundreds of hours talking to him about golf and golf development. And all I wanted to do was be involved in his next project. And that's when sort of 2003, and he kept telling he was planning Castle Stuart. And even though the entitlements process took a while, and I was living in New York this whole time, and he and his wife Dee Dee, and they got an apartment on the Upper West Side, and he lived around the corner, and we became very close friends. And so he was a mentor to me, and I loved moving. Eventually moved to Dalcross, to Castle Stuart in the summer of 2006, and was there for till through Thanksgiving, and then spent several months there in 2007, and I just loved it. And he was getting approached by all sorts of people to do projects. They were looking at places like Estonia and Maui and Heathlands around Sunningdale. and there was starting to be a groundswell of options for him, and I was scouting up their possible development projects for him, and it all came to a crashing halt around 2008 with this sort of global recession. And in some ways, I recently was telling someone that I went from having 10 leads and all sorts of sort of our pick of potential projects to sort of none at all. And in many ways, it was a lifeline to sort of circle back with Coach Patterson, be his assistant in 07 and 08, and then take over in the summer of 08 as the head coach. It was almost like a lifeline at the time if I was going to stay involved in golf. Like I was a serviceable freelance golf writer, but I was not going to make a living. And I also was watching golf publishing kind of freighter, as publishing at large was, magazines certainly were struggling and contracting. So the coaching job was something that was incredible. So I just wrapped up just 2 days ago. I turned in my laptop and ID card and my key. And
that must have been sad. That must have been sad days. 15 years or so you've been coaching Yale. Like that's, and
it was fascinating. It was the best part of that job was like a narcotic job I would do. It never felt like work to me. It was you're being the temporary steward of your alma mater's, your old program. The relationships with the kids is priceless. All I was trying to do was just create for them what the old coach did for us, which was to have the team be a critical, just be a joyful part of a larger undergraduate experience, and a historic program at that, with the number one college course. It's I guess it was coincidence or just I would have loved being the coach of that program, regardless of its pedigree. But it also was the sort of the first program. It was the one that won all these national championships. It is the one that had these amateur champions and finalists and Walker Cuppers. That just appealed to me, and so my background is not with instruction. I turned out to be a good recruiter, but I loved it. It enriched me. It brought me so much joy. I loved. There's a happiness professor here at Yale. She's kind of famous. Saying this famous class, psych, and life. Had 1,200 Yale students. And the takeaway from all her lectures is that people are happiest when they do things for other people. Yeah. So it made me happy to be their concierge and arrange golf for them. And there's not a single course in America or the world for that matter that we sort of golf can't get on. And one of the things I really enjoyed was giving the kids had their sort of golf instruction figured out. They came to me with 10,000 hours of practicing and playing, countless lesson time with coach, and I enjoyed those other elements of the golfing education. To play for me, you're going to play a rather robust list of notable courses, and you're going to get an education in golf architecture. And I truly love debating courses with them. I love taking them somewhere famous and trying to nitpick them and debate the weakest hole on the property and the best hole and compare courses to another. And I generally try to convince them that the older courses are better.
You put your own bias onto them. Is what you mean?
Yeah. Exactly. Right. I mean, that's I'm going to challenge them, and that part's tremendously fun. And that's what the team. I remember very clearly when the old coach arranged for us to play the country club at Brookline our sophomore year, the day before the Harvard Yale game. We went up in November. We went up on a Friday, like November 20th, and play the country club in sort of misty, cold rain. And it was the first time I ever played a course that had hosted a major. And that was something I'll never forget. Just the first time being at a truly historic club and wandering in the locker room. And those are the spoils that you get for coming to live in New Haven and play in the Northeast and have a long dreary winter. These are the things I used to induce them to come play for me, and they love it, and that's one of the elements. So I looked after the kids like they were my own sons. I have 3 daughters, and people are always asking me, like, don't you wish you had any sons? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Every year I have between 8 and 10 knucklehead college age boys. I get older and they stay the same age.
But it keeps you young, I bet, as well. I mean, there's quite a few themes that are sort of colliding there. I mean, there's obviously the whole sort of legacy history piece within the game. There's the architecture stuff, but I want to, just sort of hang on the Yale stuff a bit longer. I feel like being a coach at a collegiate team, it's the only real profession of being a team coach of any golf side, right? Because, it's the only way it exists in that form where it requires a coach. And you talked about your time there in George's in 92 and 36-hole matches. And, I play in a foursomes side. It's a separate society. We play a lot of 36-hole matches. You meet in the morning, 18, different pair in the afternoon. You hammer it out, and there's something so pure about that match play format. How much of that is a draw to you, that what you kind of wanted to continually be around that? Because I just think it's such a unique aspect of golf when you're playing matches. Just that whole concept of team matches, it's so addictive, whether it be the Walker Cup or the Ryder Cup or Yale taking on a side or whatever it looks like. I just feel like there's a real addiction for me there. Is that something you felt? Is that something that kind of gave you that energy for the job, do you think?
Truly. It's an individual sport, and unless you play in an Halford Hewitt or a Walker Cup or a Ryder Cup, you don't get many opportunities to be on a team, or at least in the U.S. There's more opportunities in the U.K. But what is amazing is when you sacrifice on behalf of your teammates. That, to me, that's what that's the varsity experience as a golfer, is to be disciplined during the week, to sort of make good choices, to be conscientious in your practice throughout the week, to be getting enough rest to maybe not attend a soiree on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night, to be prepared when we leave on a Friday to go down, for example, to the Princeton Invitational at Springdale, to have the 5 players be prepared so that weekend they can play to their ability and execute down the stretch. And one thing to play well, for example, as an individual in the summer, to do well in some tournament, you're happy, your parents, your friends are happy. But when you're the one who kicks in the winning score and helps drag the team across the finish line, there's nothing more that's 5 times more gratifying. Yeah. And so that is priceless. Everyone making good choices for each other. They're dedicated to their craft. They're proud. They want, being just to crack the starting 5 is its own challenge when there's sort of 8 or 9 on the side and they're all equal. There's sort of, I tell the kids all the time, I only recruit one kind of player, and that's starter. Unfortunately, there's 8 or 9 of them or 10 of them, and there's only 5 spots. So there's already just to crack the 5 is its own competition. And then in some ways it's easier to go compete against Harvard and Princeton than it is against your teammates. But I admire their conscientiousness. The team, they've all wanted to be in the lineup. I never had to motivate them. They know their scores are being seen on GolfStat. Everyone knows if they're in the lineup or not. And just, again, it goes back to, dedication to their craft, the joy of playing for your school. And there's something very positive about golf in the Ivy League, or athletics in the Ivy League really are, amateur athletics at its best in the United States. When the rest of Division I sports have becoming very commercialized, there's almost an element of corruption to the big major sports with TV deals and college football. American football coaches making $10 million a year, and the athletes don't get anything. There's been a little more justice for them recently, but what I love is this is, the Yale golfers in Ivy League golf is not going to make it on SportsCenter. The highlights they're not going to get covered. There's, other than the occasional parents or friends and girlfriends coming out to watch them, it's largely, it's not exactly the most spectated. It's not exactly
it's intrinsic, but it means they're playing for the right reasons, right? And so then it becomes
right. And yet they play their hearts out. They put it all in the line. The week leading up to the Ivies is to them, it's a major championship. They're all in, and they're practicing around the clock, and they're getting in their work when they can. And yet, all that time, the reason I always loved being in the business of trying to recruit a kid to Yale and convince them to get an Ivy League education, and where academics are the top priority. And athletics are a close second, but there's no confusing the two. And in that regard, that's what amateur or varsity athletics was 100 years ago, and that's where it is here in the Ivy League, and that's where it's going to remain. There's something very pure about that. They're going to go on. They're all going to go professional. They're just going to go on to Wall Street, or, like I said, law school or med school, something. Occasionally someone's good enough to try to play professional. James Nicholas is making a good go at it. But they love to compete. They love to play golf. They love this beautiful game, and to play in a team format. And you kind of realize that sort of the window closes. You only get one thing that the graduating seniors say every year at the bank, the general theme, we all kind of know it already, is how quickly it goes. It's not take it for granted. And you start to see it happening, by your senior year, you're like, oh, wait, this spree is not going to continue forever. When you're on your last spring break, you realize that, you're not going to spend 2 weeks every March leaving a trail of dead of epic golf courses somewhere. You might, unless it's like you guys, unless you can make it a living. Unless you can figure out what it looks like on the surface. I can assure you, it's not all rainbows. I'm with you, man. How do you get there? You gotta be willing to, you gotta hustle. You gotta be willing to make some sacrifices for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's really what's fun about it, is you recruit kids when they're 16, or you start to talk to them and engage with them. They're high achieving. They show up as freshmen wet behind the ears. You watch them go through this arc from 18 to 22. See them grow as a person. You see them develop. You see their effort. You see these achieve milestones. See them have success and agony on the team, and then they graduate, and then I love, then they start just like children. I mean, they eventually eventually get invited to their weddings, and then they start to have children, and you're like, oh my God, what a fantastic opportunity to sort of just be one element of their development and be part of their lives and that of their families. Terrific.
Yeah, you stay close to them, don't you? Like post-graduation. I think I saw something on there from the Harvard-Yale Golfing Society, you know, congratulating you and applauding you for all the good work and everything. And it talks in there a lot about, you know, the connection you maintain with the students and stuff afterwards. And, you know, that again, that being that sense of continuity in that relationship, because you're with them for a long time, like, and you forge in, you know, kind of priceless memories together. You just naturally become really important parts of each other's life. I'm really curious. Do you see a really big difference? You know, 15 years is a long time, generational, you know, sort of differences. Have you noticed a massive difference, be it in the mindset, the attitude of the players that come through year on year? I suppose every year it becomes difficult to sort of notice the pattern, but I would imagine if you looked back in 2009, 2008 players versus the guys that are coming in wet behind the ears last year, there must be a marked difference just in their overall approach. You know, I always feel like kids these days are way more mature than I am even today. Now, maybe that's because I'm massively immature and I'm, you know, or actually kids are just getting a lot more mature, and whether that's because of social media or whatever, but they all just seem to approach the game differently as well. They're much more dialed, I guess, would be the sort of observation I would have.
You've hit the nail on the head. The data and information, like they're tracking Rory's workouts on Instagram. They don't have to be introduced to the decade sort of strategies of club selection and they have perfect fitting. They're disciplined in their eating. They're much smarter about reading the wind and shaping it. They're just coming in with, I have to say the 15-year trend has been just a trickle down of the sort of the scientific elements of the game, the physical and mental preparedness. They all have spent time. They all know their TrackMan data. Their you know, their G4, their quad sort of numbers. They know how to fix issues when the ball's spinning too much. It's fascinating. It's just like mini tour pros. You know, anything you can do to shave a stroke here and there, and smart decision making. And one thing I love doing with them, thing I do well, was sort of doing diagnostics of golf courses after the practice round. Loved sort of debating where a hole went from one tee or under certain wind, the situational kind of choices you make off the tee, driver. I try to, you know, they used to always proceed by instinct to just pull driver everywhere and take, you know, they took like a split second to scrutinize the hole, and they've gotten much better at making, you know, hedging, knowing when the opportunities are to strike, to lay back. To me, that's fascinating. You think about it, you're contributing a score. It has to be the kids can't, you know, when they go out to play, they'll take their time on short putts. The score they're going to submit has to be the highest it could have been, right? No higher than X. Yeah. And if a player's smart decision making can save himself a stroke and 9 for a 54-hole tournament, they've saved themselves potentially 6 strokes by just, you know, smart, rational decision making. And each player, each submitting score does that. That's 24 strokes. You can go from, the difference could be losing a tournament by 1 or a 23-shot rout just by just by sort of better leaves and, you know, not taking any reckless decision making. So you're going to presume everyone's going to be sort of fitted with good clubs, and their equipment's going to be paired up, and we're going to expect our opponents to be generally in decent, you know, they're all going to be sort of following a sort of workout regimen that's going to improve their game. But to me, team wins can come from just team's culture of really smart decision making, scrutinizing the golf holes, knowing what the wind's going to be doing, declining sort of less than fair odds on certain shots, knowing when to attack. That to me, that's really fun because everyone's playing the same course. And I love seeing when teams just sort of, I love seeing other teams make some poor decisions out there, just sort of shaking my head going, I can't believe. Yeah.
But that's the thing you can control, isn't it? I mean, it is fascinating, and I don't want to digress too much on this, and I definitely don't want to get into a rollback debate, but the players you see now, and I think some of that plays into some of that USGA, RNA rollback stuff, is we've now got a generation of players on our hands that have only grown up playing with that mindset of learning around speed, building a swing around Pro V1s and, big driver heads, and, have had access to all this information about making smarter decisions, strategy, and all this sort of stuff. And they are just a different breed of golfer, because the guys in 2008, they were probably brought up on a diet of digging it out of the dirt in junior competitions, feel, maybe looking at different concepts that we might think now are a bit more old and, have had their day. And fundamentally, the ball's a bit different, so that the game has just moved on. And I think that's where you've now got this sort of delayed fuse of almost that 15 years, which almost perfectly ties up really with your Yale coaching thing. I want to circle back just briefly on your time at Yale, Colin, as a player, because I'm right in thinking you're obviously a very high-level player in getting into that side in the first place. You weren't just picked on your good looks, I can assure you. I'm joking, of course, but was there ever a point in time where you thought, do you know what, I'm gonna go full time playing this? I think I might have heard a good story about this in the past. Maybe I'm teeing you up.
Well, no, there are people definitely chuckling on this side of the Atlantic, hearing that I was a good player. So I was just good enough to qualify for the Insurance Youth Classic National Tournament, the Big I, one of 4 players to go from Connecticut, Pinehurst number 7 in 1992. I went with J.J. Henry, a dear friend of mine from Fairfield, Connecticut, who's been on the tour, a Ryder Cupper, and won multiple times. And the course was the longest course I'd ever seen in my life. I wasn't a particularly good driver of the ball in 1992 with my little tiny tailor-made steel burner head with steel shaft that I probably hit 258 yards. And it rained, and I didn't have rain gloves, and I didn't have I don't know if anybody had sort of Gore-Tex, but I was thoroughly unprepared for the conditions, the golf course, the competition. And I played well coming in the rain. I somehow managed to make 3 birdies and shot 80, and wasn't particularly disappointing with it. It could have been worse. And I remember thinking, I was in the morning wave, and a phenom by the name of Eldrick Woods was at the same tournament. My lifetime, I only ever head-to-head against it in terms of being in the same tournament. And I remember thinking, well, let's see what this kid everyone's talking about. Let's see how he does out there. Maybe he shoots a 76. I don't know. And of course he goes out and he shoots a 66. And I remember thinking then and there, I'll never forget it. It was the weekend of the 92 PGA Championship. Nick Price won at Bellerive that weekend. And I remember right then and there going, oh my God, I'm never going to be a professional golfer. That was unfathomable. Like, that was light years away from what was possible. And so I always joke, I think I enrolled at Yale a 1 handicap, and by the time I graduated, I was at 13. I had a strong grip and a 2-way miss, and the Yale court stroke play, metal play golf broke me. But so it was in spite of all that. It was the travel with coach and hearing his stories and learning golf history and the relationships with my teammates. I was I was very good at recruiting. I was very good even then as an undergrad of hosting the recruits, and I kind of I was able to kind of recruit my way out of the starting lineup. Helping convince all the players behind me. So even then I was basically doing it. And then somehow after, like a lot of the old coach used to say, everyone got better after college. And I eventually settled into a pretty decent golfer, and I was a legitimate +1 all through my 30s. And without playing a lot, but not really practicing. And then I made an ill-advised kind of swing change around the time I turned 40, around the same time I had a third daughter, around the same time that I sort of started playing less. And I like to joke that if you want to read about my game now, you can just turn to the obituary section of the newspaper. So I am, I've probably broken par and shot in the 60s, 10 or 20, 15, 20 times in my life. So I did play to a high level for a while, and I nearly qualified for the 2011 West Amateur. It would have been at Erin Hills, and I would have gone there and easily missed the cut, and I would have been easily trunk slamming it at that. But so my game, to play with me is though I still love it, right? I mean, I'm no less in love with the game that I can't play well. I don't get any of the joy of being a really good golfer, but situationally, I can still get hot here and there.
Yeah, exactly, which is always nice to know. Yeah. The players you work with, and maybe when you're studying and playing, or whether you're coaching, when you're seeing these players really up close at that level, where those are the key moments, those are the key years where they're kind of either going to make it as a player, or they're going to go and pursue a professional pastime, whether it's Wall Street or medicine or whatever. Can you tell? Can you sort of see it right out straight away that person's going to make it, or does it still shock you? Do you still see people and go, did not have Zalatoris down to be a world beater? Or do you know what I mean?
Sure, of course. I mean, that's the interesting thing, that never know. The one thing I always think you have to let a kid have, until they can have a year or two after college without the sort of rigor of academics, they can move somewhere with sort of, and get a year-round, get sort of a 12-month golf season in. You do sort of want to see, you do wish kids could sort of, its odds are obviously so long, but there is something to be said about it. A player giving themselves sort of a 24, 36-month kind of runway to see how good they can get. And yet, if you're going to be cold-blooded about it, if you're not a first or second team All-American in college, you're probably not going to, it's going to be hard to have success. Now, there's obviously exceptions, and I think there's nothing more admirable than someone who just wills their way eventually and takes a circuitous route to the tour through sort of hard work and years of sort of grinding and improving. So there are multiple paths. There's always going to be those rocket ship candidates. And I kind of have learned that you can't judge, you can't make assumptions for better for worse based on a fundamentally perfect swing or a flawed swing. Two of the best college golfers I ever saw, one was from Old Miss and the other was from Georgia Southern, and both had some of the most idiosyncratic swings I've ever seen. And we were at one tournament where this player was, he had a strong grip and he had these low slappy hooks. He shot 18 under and he won by 12 strokes.
Yeah.
So that is the beautiful thing about our game, is the element of that sort of someone's ability to score, of their golfing IQ, their intuition. I had a player from Ascot, Owen Leonard from Surrey. He's Irish. Father worked in London, and they were kind of passing his English. But Owen was one of the best players I ever had, and he did not have sort of a perfect golf swing. He crossed the line, and yet the way he flighted the ball, his ability, his short game, his scoring, his when conditions got worse, he got better. You know, I always joke, could if I would, I'd have a 10-man roster, 3 from England, 3 from Ireland, 3 from Scotland, and a Welsh golfer. That would be my idea, because to survive in the Northeast in September, October, and April, and play in crap weather when it's ground is, especially in the spring, it's all wet and tender, and there's, you got to be able to persevere. The UK golfer treats that as a normal day, whereas I tease the guys from San Diego who actually grew up in a biosphere of ideal conditions their whole lives.
Yeah. But you see it, don't you? And I mean, I hope the Open Championship this year will be a good spectacle. I hope they get some tough weather. I mean, going to St Andrews last year, it was fairly calm. There was nothing really in the weather. And I think you really need that in this country for the courses to come alive, which is, maybe that's slightly different to other parts of the world. But, when the wind blows on the links, there's no better feeling. That's kind of a pretty neat segue, I guess, into some of the architecture stuff. So, your heart almost lies over here with the different, whether it's the ancient links or the quirky 9-holers or the heathlands of Surrey. You've taken, I sense, a lot of inspiration right before. I can't even remember if we'd hit the record button by then, but you were, perhaps envious on behalf of the Americans or what the British golfing culture feels like at times, because, there's a number of things. There's some massive differences, aren't there? What specifically do you mean when you talk about that? And then what are the things that you try and bottle through the developments? Things like Ohoopee have been, hugely successful, work at Castle Stuart. You've been involved, I believe, in the restoration at Yale, which is a Seth Rayner course, I believe. And, it was almost to the facing closure there. There's a whole heap of stuff, and a lot of that's drawing on inspiration from Great Britain and Ireland. What are the kind of key things that you see, and sort of how do you sort of try and bottle that stuff up?
Sure, I could list 100 bullet points, but from courses specifically, to me, it's fascinating that Linksland represents like 0.1% of the total acreage of the UK and Ireland. I mean, and it comes and goes. And in America, that land would be privately owned and it would be off limits. And it seems like in every town, there's just sort of, there's a couple hundred acres of sand dunes that somehow became a golf course and that are walking distance on the edge of town. It's, to me, that's fascinating. You can't take that for granted. And so natural courses on ideal terrain, you're very lucky to have a climate that doesn't have humidity, that's ideal for sort of fine fescue and courses that don't require a lot of maintenance. Sort of, you don't have to. I love this idea that barely, all these links courses use fairway irrigation as a precaution. Mm-hmm. I'd say the antithesis in America is just parkland golf of lush green, heavy clay soil, deciduous trees. I know that Oak Hill looked awesome, and I'm glad they restored it. And I don't want to sound like a complete snob, but parkland golf is for the birds. It bores me. Did you notice that every single hole is don't miss the rough, don't get blocked out by tree, a narrow fairway where it's hard to really too narrow to actually pick a side of the fairway and have any. The strategy is to not hit the rough. And then the same shot into an aerial shot into a green. Occasionally you can chase the ball on when you're out of position. That's
that was
something
a departure from Southern Hills, wasn't it? Everyone was. I mean, I've not visited either, but what you see in America with the coverage was a lot of reverence towards Oak Hill, and yet it felt like quite a big departure from where Southern Hills was last year, which I thought set up really well and was really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, these are great courses, Wingfoot and Medina, and yet they can't compare to a windswept seaside course with uneven lies and unpredictable bounces and a wind that refreshes the challenge day to day, morning to afternoon, in and out with the tides. Like, you're right. Like, wind that can blow on every degree of the dial. Your courses never get old. I could play any links course over there every day for 100 days in a row and not get tired of it. I could not say that about Oak Hill. I don't want to pile on that. It looks awesome.
No, it's just a recent example. It's recency, isn't it? But you're right.
Right. And
so much in being a good repeat course. There's the golf traveler goes and plays places and they want to enjoy it. But we invariably measure anything except your home club on a one-time visit, and you say whether it was good, bad, or indifferent. And yet there's almost people never want to measure repeat, and we're a massive victim of that. We've just been on tour and played 8 different courses in 4 days or whatever. But sometimes there's something to be said for just playing somewhere 30 times and you see a completely different love for it. Porth Call, I've been lucky to go in there for a long period of time. It grows on you so much because it repeats so well. It's so nuanced.
But yeah, I agree. Inscrutable. I'd say, the secret ingredient of the projects I'm doing is I'm jumping onto the bandwagon of finding sandy sites, free draining rock properties with undulation, elevation. You can have self-contained lows. They remain playable. One thing that's awesome about Ohoopee, it's on this Kershaw sand that drains 20 inches an hour. You can be staying there overnight, and there can be an overnight rainstorm where it comes down like cats and dogs. And by the time you sort of wake up in the morning and come out of the clubhouse after breakfast, it's as if it never happened. The playability of your free draining courses. In America, when you get into this heavy soils and you build in the southeast and some of those marshy, low country areas, you're creating these catch basins with drains at the bottom of them, and it's a heavy soil, and after it rains they're soggy, and it's just not this. It's not as great as it is in the UK. The partial hazards of the undulating stances that you get. That you're just it's so much more of an art form to judge all those things. An uneven lie, ball above your stance, one leg's lower. It's a diagonal crosswind. It's 185 yards. You could fling a 7 draw. You could cut a 5. There's just, to me, that's just captivating. You can't get. How can you get tired of that? And it comes with a big time lunch, and there's going to be plenty of lager, claret, and cool afterwards. And there's dignity to the lunch, and among the other things. I could, from a point of view of culture, obviously pace of play, I love the match play component. I love the monthly medals would be something. I can't believe we're effectively exclusively monthly medals. Our golf, basically make people count every score, which to me is ludicrous from so many reasons. But I wish we determined handicaps once a month. The rest of the time was just, playing the regular tees and playing matches. I recently said to someone, I wish we cut our maintenance budgets down. We don't need to maintain everything. It doesn't need to be in perfect condition the entire year. We lost the script on treating these things. These things, there's no seasonality to them anymore. They're expected to be. They're held to a ridiculous standard. Their expectations are unreasonable.
They're so high, aren't they? We see that creep in here as well. But I think, partly because of the quantum of what people are willing to pay, because of the, it is more accessible at the higher end of golf in this country. Therefore, there's always that expectation that's delivered for a set cost. So therefore, the expectation levels can never get out of control. Whereas I sense that, and we saw it, I think you always draw influence, don't you, across different sides of the Atlantic. There was that whole period really around which I think we're coming out of now, where we're starting to accept that brown's a good color on a golf course, and oranges, and seeing things a little burnt. But for many years, we were chasing the lush green grass and watering everything intensively and stuff, because it was about trying to deliver a product that looked like Augusta National, and therefore that expectation feeds in. It comes at the right time of the year. Everyone's excited about the season ahead, and they see Augusta and they think, God, it remains the time of the year where people are most critical of their own golf course, because it doesn't look like how it looks on TV. Expectation's a dangerous thing, and I think course conditioning is obviously enjoyable. I mean, who doesn't like playing on quick, pure greens, and who doesn't like seeing just short turf everywhere that's just perfectly manicured? But again, without labouring it too much, going and playing the likes of Carradale and Try and Dunavity, it's not about the condition. It's about where you are and the adventure and the company, and having these kind of intriguing and thought-provoking layouts. I think that's the kind of key thing. You've taken a lot of that into the development. So Castle Stuart was the first project you worked on. You mentioned Mark Parsonen. A couple of weeks ago, we were lucky to be up at Castle Stuart for a few days. They're obviously starting to look at breaking ground on the second site. I mean, Stuart McCollum, as does everyone, speaks of Mark with complete and utter reverence. You worked with him closely, a good friend. Obviously died, far too young. Was he an absolute genius? He would still be developing some of the great courses today, right?
Yeah. Shout out to Stuart McCollum. I love him. Mark had one of the great second acts in golf. Like, he was in his mid-40s. He was retired. He was successful. He had been sort of a consultant. He had taken he had made plenty of money, and he was extremely smart. He had the sort of a mind of an engineer. Played hockey at Penn, and he went on to Stanford Business. Very analytical mind. Dragged his family in his mid-40s to Scotland to sort of be the one that made Kingsbarns happen. He obsessed about architecture. He was on a mission to sort of educate as well. He was convinced that there was ways to have a course be challenging for the pros and playable. He was basically building for himself. He adored the old course. He played it hundreds of times. He walked it every Sunday. He loved Mackenzie. He loved playability. He loved width and angles. There's his attention to detail, his humor, his drive, his motivation. It was all inspiring. It was a joy to be around him. He was hilarious. And he knew he was right, and he was. I mean, this guy basically, after it sort of happening, he happened to get involved at Granite Bay at this golf course in his community in sort of suburban Sacramento. It led to Kingsbarns, and then it led to Castle Stuart. Think about this. An American, California, made two contributions to golf in Scotland, Kingsbarns and Castle Stuart.
Quite the CV, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, he put his money where he risked his own money. He knew that you weren't going to get a triple SI site permitted, or at least not easily. You could look at, somehow Machrihanish Dunes made it happen, but you can see obviously what's going on at the Cool. And you could see sort of like the flack that's going on out there at Trump Aberdeen. He saw the opportunity to convert not triple SI grounds into something that looks like, by the time it was done, that it should have been triple SI, that it was links lab. He wasn't opposed. He was not a minimalist. He was willing to shape everything under the sun and do a big muck shift, and strip the topsoil and mine sand from the site and go all in on it, and frame views. I mean, he was a visual golfer. He designed for himself. He was a 10 handicap who was not particularly, didn't have a great sort of, he loved to putt from off the green. He loved putting on links courses from valleys of sin and 10, 15 yards off the green. He would often talk about how boring a typical third shot is in American golf, where it's the same kind of flop shot around the greens. And he talked about how the third shot at the old course was the most exciting to him. That's where those were always the most compelling shots, because you're playing well, you're always hitting in the green, you got a birdie putt. But when you're like him, he loved trying to solve the problem of a really complicated up and over, and using kind of contours successfully, and the choices that came when you could. He loved UK golf. He was humble in spite of I miss him. I loved him. He was a force of nature. That's the only way to put it.
But that must have left an impression then. So then, how heavily are you then now involved in these developments? Because, if we take perhaps like Ohoopee as an example, I mean, that stuff with Mark will have left a lasting impression, either consciously or subconsciously. But then your role in these developments, and, I get the sense that you're almost sort of cultivating things that are slightly different to the accepted norm of, private country club, 18 holes, halfway house. There's, it's trying to do things in a slightly different way, which should be good, but it must also be hard to tear up the rule book completely. So, how are you going about these things? What's your role on the projects? I guess just tell me a little bit more about, maybe through the lens of Ohoopee as a case study, really.
Well, right. So, I like I said earlier, it was the Yale opportunity couldn't have come at a better time. It was like a lifeline in 2008. There weren't going to be golf development projects, but still, even while I was being hired, I was trying to get with my friends Will Smith and Quentin Lutz. The original version of the Outpost Club we were looking in the Lake districts of the Sandhills to do a destination club for 20 and 30 something members, do a real bare bones kind of, dormitory style, lodging and long tables like Prestwick, where it would be family style and a cookout. And so that, as much as I loved coaching, and like I said, it was best part of it, like a narcotic. My real passion is in golf development. That's why I was an intern for Mark. I was essentially apprentice at the age of 30. And so I've always wanted to do projects. I made a decision. I remember thinking, there was a time where originally I was going to pursue architecture, and I saw the lifestyle. I saw the travel associated with it. I saw the never-ending kind of, time spent with living out of your suitcase, and I love living in New York, and eventually met my wife and started to have a family. And I saw what Mark was doing. I liked this idea of instead of being an actor or director in a film, being the producer, taking a longer arc on these projects, where instead of coming in and maybe just jumping from one to the next, you really curate them. And so in 2015, things were finally good enough in America, year 6 or 7 of the Obama recovery, that you could daydream about a destination private club in a rural area. And I originally visited the Ohoopee site in the spring of 2009, when it was going to be called Victory Lane, and Gil Hance was going to co-design a course with Davis Love III, and the project was going to have a Formula 1 racetrack. If you can, you could still see it's rough, and still see it on Google Earth. And there was going to be condos and an equestrian center, and it was going to be a sporting club, and the golf was going to be a small element of it. And it wasn't going to be front and center, and it would have been fine. But that project kind of collapsed, as they all would have in 2008, 2009, and it just was clearly not the time to do something like that. And then 6 years later, I'd never forgotten how pretty the site was, these live oaks, and just bed of sand, forested sand dune. I mean, think about that, like basically like elements of Hornby. And looked into the site, found out how it had been sold on the courthouse steps to an onion farmer, a Vidalia onion farmer. This is the area of this region of Georgia where sweet onions come from.
Right, okay. And hence the logo, right?
Yeah. And I spent a year putting together a deck and assembled all the role players and teed up the the environmental consultants and the civil engineers, and I was going to go out and this second version was just to be just a straight Gale Hands golf course with cabins, no condos or Formula One racetrack, and in this January of 2016, I'm going to go out and try to raise $18 million, or as a start, and get 18 founders at $1 million each, and let's get going on this. But I needed the first guy in, and not that people thought I was crazy, but it wasn't exactly like, a Gale Hands course in rural Georgia in 2016 was something people kind of looked at you sideways. Fortunately, I checked in with Leslie Ray, the woman, the membership salesperson at Emerald Dunes. I sort of said, Leslie, do you have any members who have hit their head and want to do a Gale Hands course in rural Georgia? And lo and behold, she's like, you need to get in touch with Mike Walrath. He's trying to do a Gale Hands course in southern Georgia, down where he's looking to do a course with Gale, possibly in Georgia, looking potentially at land near the sort of quail plantations in South Georgia near Albany. And they looked at stuff on Long Island, and it's inevitable they would have looked into this project. But it was pretty exciting. I got in touch with Mike, and we spoke for a couple hours, and that night he sent me a long, sort of 4,000 word email, and then we spoke for a couple hours the next day, and I sent him my materials. Within a few days, we were on his plane flying to visit the site. The end of January of 2016, and within 22 months of that first site visit, he had 22 holes, shaped, seeded, and growing in.
Wow.
Fascinating, elapsed time there. He, to his credit, to his eternal credit, I mean, he saw it, he loved it. In that first call, I mentioned, we're going to try to get a bunch of guys, and accidentally intimated that he might be willing to do it himself or take the lead on it. And he's a fascinating, like Mark Parson, and a fascinating individual, super smart and passionate, and what he's done there is incredible. It's struck a nerve. Being, with all due respect to other places in the Southeast, I don't know if there's any place in the Southeast I'd rather play my winter golf than Ohoopee. It's Southeast American heathland, forested. It's forested. It's in a conversation. I'm talking texture and ground with Pinehurst, Pine Valley, Sunningdale, the Berkshire, Swinley. It's got decent movement. It's 30,000-year-old sand dunes, these riverine sand dunes that sort of come and go. There's otherwise, the region otherwise there's a lot of heavy soil, and there's yet these just aberrations, these pockets of sand. The Ohoopee Dunes run for 22 miles, but they're never more than 3/4 of a mile wide. So you can imagine this thin snake of sand dunes. And so Ohoopee's in the thick of it. And yet when you're on the highway driving from from Atlanta to Savannah, and you're on I-16 and you're driving at 60 miles an hour,
yeah.
When you cross the Ohoopee River, if you're paying attention for about 45 seconds, the complexion of the soil quickly changes, and it's entirely different. And then within a minute, it's back to the sort of heavy clay. And so it's similar in the sense of the way Linksland just briefly comes and goes.
Yeah.
And then if you track the coastline of the UK and Ireland, you might go 20 miles of just rocky headlands, and then briefly there's a sort of just a massive deposit of sand, and then it might be another 5 miles of just sort of headlands again. I mean, it really is very situational when it happens, which makes things like St. Patrick's so glorious when you get just like a triple extra large, portion of sand dunes at once. But so Ohoopee's been really fun. I mean, it had the match play component. Mike gave Gil the chance. That element of it gave Gil a chance to take risk. It wasn't trying to be a sort of stroke play golf course. He was able to dial in some quirk. It's extremely walkable. It's got a great caddy culture. It brings people a lot of joy. I'll tell you one thing you can appreciate is if you're there in January or December or January and there's a frost delay. The temperature really heats up quickly in the sand, and even if it's 50 degrees, if you're walking with a jumper on and the sun is out and you sort of walk through the sort of sandy ways from the tees to the greens, that they act as a heat sink, and the temperature really heats up and it becomes eminently playable. And the reason why I want to take you there in the winter, they don't overseed in the dormant Bermuda. The place plays like a lynx.
Just fast and fiery, and just ball just chases away.
Absolutely. The fairways turn yellow. Have you ever played Bermuda grass in the winter when it's dormant and you kind of put your 9-iron down in the fairway and it just slides? It's like frictionless. So that place brings a lot of people happiness. I love going there, and it led to sort of other opportunities. The couple projects I have going now, during COVID, during the COVID shutdowns, I helped. It was a joy to help Zach Blair with the Tree Farm project. We said Ohoopee was sort of all the places he traveled in his travels, just in his due diligence for the Tree Farm, that was the closest to what he had in his mind of what he wanted to do. So I enjoyed helping him there when COVID shut everything down and there was no athletics in the fall of 2020 and the spring of 21. I barely saw my players. It was a pretty depressing time for everybody patiently waiting for our vaccine. I don't have to tell Britons about that time and just my kids were, like all kids that age, just COVID was, the lockdowns and the education were not being helpful. The one saving grace was working with Zach on the Tree Farm, and I loved writing the deck with him. I always said you can't do it until you write it down first. And, I really enjoyed putting that together with him. It was like another lifeline. It was wonderful. And then that spring of 21, a senior at Bucknell, Blaze, this nice kid, Texas, he introduced me to a listing for a 7,000 acre hunting ranch in Texas Panhandle, all sand dunes. I mean, it looks like something out of the west of Ireland. And I thought Texas was bereft of any good ground for golf, and it had just bad soils, and generally the case. But somehow up here in the Panhandle on the Prairie Dog, Town Fork, Red River, at the headwaters of the Red River, at 1,900 feet, were a series of deposits of sand dunes. And that first listing led to more research. It led to us going to this place called Rocking Chair Ranch, where the 81-year-old rancher, Howard Head, couldn't believe it when we approached him that we were interested in coming to see his land, because we essentially spied on his property using, satellite technology. And you can imagine, to his credit, he didn't say no, and he graciously showed us his land, and it led to a series of visits and a slow courtship to where he grudgingly sold us 1,600 acres of his 15,000 acre cattle ranch.
Wow.
On the north.
1,600 acres is huge as well.
It is.
It's huge.
It is. It has ravines, and that led to a similar kind of process of research and due diligence, and putting together a deck and trying to find someone interested, which is what happened in January of 22. So that's fascinating that project's greenlit. It's called Childress Hall, and Tom Doak's going to start in November, December. he's going to set records for the least amount of soil moved. It's basically like the apotheosis of his minimalist career. He's basically going to like slice the 17th green to create a little postage stamp par 3. There's going to be a little bit of fill in the 15th green and a few tiny other edits. And there's virtually going to be no shaping tees and fairways. It's unbelievable. And then immediately to the next to it, which has been greenlit and will start 1 year later, is Gil Hanse's routing in the chop. And the two courses are going to have complementary, in spite of the fact that they're side by side. They're going to be different. They're going to be different, like Dunluce and Valley or Old and New at Sunningdale, or trying to think of, but
no, but sometimes they're too similar, aren't they? And then it just becomes an exercise in, which do you prefer? You prefer the A or the B, or the old and new? And it's like, you look at some of the great old courses. I mean, St George's Hill now just has the green 9, but that used to be an 18-hole, essentially a sort of a quote unquote ladies 18-hole short course that would be there. And I think it's right that 2 course developments, they should have different flavors. That you wouldn't.
Yeah, well, it's right. Sometimes the land doesn't sort of allow such a thing. You have to make stylistic choices. Like you're going to make it Wingfoot East will be the easier course, or be take more risk, or one will be more of the sort of in the fold of a championship course. So that project, I'll let the courses eventually speak for themselves, but the terrain is exquisite. The ground, the views are incredible. The sand dunes, the sand it is a fine sand. It's easily windblown. It does have a red complexion to it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, nice.
It has a little iron component to it, but it has all the same prairie grasses. It's got fescues and blue stem, and got gorgeous flora, yucca plants and prickly pear that are going to flower. Real desert-like conditions. It's windy. It's at 1,900 feet. It's going to play through the winter. It's going to be like rye out there. I mean, it's going to be awesome. And right now there's 2 courses staked in sand dunes side by side. That project is high flying. And then I've always been fascinated by the Lake Wales Sand Ridge. In the middle of Florida, running like a spine through the center of Florida, is a 100-mile long sand dune called the Lake Wales Sand Ridge. That was essentially a little millions of years ago, when all of Florida was underwater. There was just this like archipelago of little sandy islands that stuck out, and they have this beach sand that's extremely soft. It's like sand that you're sinking to your ankles. It's going to have to be amended for bunkers and things, but I went and did some. It's not far from Streamsong, but there's a famous solo course in America called Mountain Lake. It's a Seth Rayner course. I've always loved it. I was always fascinated by the name Mountain Lake in Florida when the state is flat. How do they dare call themselves that? And yet here you go. There's the high point of 340 feet above sea level near at Clock Tower. So I never gave up on an idea of a course in the interior or in the Lake Wales Ridge. And I reached out to a broker and found a listing a couple of years ago. And then it wasn't quite right. And on that same day, I just started driving around Venus, Florida, and was able to sort of identify this diagonal ridge with 50 feet of fall that tapered its way diagonally northeast through these citrus groves. And we helped with the broker's help. I was able last summer to find a guy out of Charlotte, a terrific guy who wanted to take the lead on this project called High Growth. And it'll be like Ohoopee in the sense of it'll have a Gil Hanse course in sand with tasteful rustic cabins, a tasteful clubhouse, a walking culture, no homes, no real estate component to it. It's fascinating because it's in the middle of the state. It's 90 minutes from Naples, Florida, on the Gulf side, and it's 90 minutes from Jupiter, Florida.
Oh, no way! Right, okay.
On the east side. Yeah. And we have 1,200 acres of citrus groves that are on these ancient sand dunes that rise in elevation from 105 feet to 175 feet. And that's with a big, huge ridge working its way through it. So those natural features for Florida are like Nepal, right? I mean, those are significant. Those are significant for a state where the majority of the new course projects are essentially like dredge, cut and fill, create ponds, take the material from the dredging of the pond, the creation of the pond, to build features. And that's cool. There's going to be really good courses done that way. And, you know, both courses at MacArthur and name them, but they're not, and they're going to work out fine. But those are almost basically done as computer projects, or, they're almost like video games, whereas there's nothing reactive. Mm-hmm. You get to be a creator in a sense. It is pretty cool. But, in this case, it's going to be a true lay of the land property. And the fun thing about these types of places where you've got a private club and even though you're sort of, the ambition is to get a high ranking, sort of not because you need it, because the project deserves it, because the golf is great, you get to take risks, and you do have occasional blind shot. And I hope I'm hell bent on having blind shots in America. The Yale course has multiple bell holes. I don't, and it annoys me, this lame conventional wisdom that you can't have blind shots when it hasn't held Royal County down back from... No.
That's still regarded as a reasonably good golf course, and there's plenty of blind shots there, aren't there? It's...
Right.
And they're unfair, but they are equally unfair. It's one of the wisest things I think I've ever heard Eric Anders Lang say, is that this concept that blind shots are unfair, but because everyone has to play them, they're equally unfair. And it's, we don't mind kinks in the fairway and crazy movement in the land, which is also as abstract and whatever. And there's never anything more exciting than a punch bowl green. Walking to the top and not knowing where on earth the ball is and seeing it roll 5 feet and probably thinking, got that one a bit out the bottom groove. Actually, that's just done very well on the floor, I think. I'm
with you. There's nothing like hitting what you think is a really good shot and then sort of replacing your divot and grabbing your bag and kind of quickly walking to the crest or the crown of whatever line feature you carried and seeing your ball sort of 6 feet from the one.
It's a byproduct, but it's a byproduct of writing the score down, isn't it? It's like it's a byproduct of the fact that we're trying to measure our score. If we liberate ourselves from what we scored in total across 18 holes of golf, then it's okay. If you're playing with a guy in a match and you're both playing to a blind green, then you're on the same footing because you're not measuring yourself against par, and that's why the holes like Rye, You look at the 13th at Rye with its second shot in there. It's almost impossible to know where to aim if it's the first time you've played the course. But if you're playing in a match, it's a great sense of drama. I've seen the deck for Highgrove. Go on, sorry, you go.
No, I'm always rereading Scotland's Gift by McDonald. I was looking for good quotes to include in the sort of the rules, the notice to competitors in the McDonald Cup or the Yale Fall Invitational. And I just love, to me, the British game, McDonald exudes the British game. And one thing that I love is his quote that there's no eternal justice in this game, as in life. You take the bitter with the sweet. You don't, to me, I feel like I am in a crusade against this concept of fairness, that golf is meant to be fair, that there should be, there should be a proportional punishment, handed out. Like, I'm sorry, like you might get up against the face of the bunker and have to hit outside of it. It's not unfair if you can play out from it. Mm-hmm. This idea of fairness, it has spoiled the game. It should be arbitrary. You should, like Bobby Jones, your good shots get bad breaks and your bad shots get good breaks. And in the end, it all evens out in the course of a match. That's just how it goes. And it's how you respond to it. And if you relish it, I want my golf spicy. I want it to be exciting. I want unexpected surprises. I want blindness, unfairness, on penalty. I want real hazards for.
Yeah, you want the roller coaster of emotions. You want to go through the mill, don't you? You want to be disappointed because you've hit a great shot. You're completely short-sighted and it's just not fair. Yeah. You want that. You know, you might not feel like it at the time. I've seen the deck for Highgrove and you kindly sent it on to me. I was fascinated by the stuff that's included in there, postcard images, etc. Obviously, the architecture is a huge part, but there's so much of this is about what's happening off the course. Now, I've always said, and our listeners will get bored of this, but for me, there's never anything more exciting than getting out of the car at a car park of a golf course that I've never played before, because it's always different and everything has a different sort of sense and there's different ineffable qualities in the air. And I kind of sense that curating that gives you as much joy as probably the golf itself. You're an obsessive around clubhouses, I believe, and you know, buildings, yes. and I think it's a fine art that we massively overlook, because you can have huge buildings, you can have huge cavernous clubhouses, you know, and you can have tiny intimate ones. And I have a personal preference. I mean, our home club Blackwell has a ridiculously small clubhouse. You know, the Spike Bar has seating for about 12 people. That is the only room you spend time in. But when there's 60 people up there on a Saturday morning and it's heaving, you get no better atmosphere. And I think clubhouses are just so important in terms of the general vibe and the feeling of the club. And I just think it's quite an interesting science. I suppose I'm just curious to get your take on it in general. I'm sure this will be another thing that you could go into unbelievable detail on.
Yes, I will. Yes, so I saw all these projects, and you want to get the golf right? So that's first and foremost. But I don't think enough people put as much thought as they should or could into completing the project. And that's your built environment, your layout, your land plan. One of the very first things within the first 5 minutes of talking to Mike Walrath about Ohoopee, I did say, whatever you do, let's make sure clubhouse is engaged with the golf course. Like, let's have it be adjacent to the first tee and the 18th green, and let's have a big, huge porch and a covered porch, and let's get that component right, because not enough. I don't think people necessarily put as much thought into it as they could. Or I see why during development you set back the clubhouse, because the construction of the clubhouse has its own setbacks, and the golf course has its setbacks, instead of sort of the two having having them be a conflict. I see why it's just easy to just elect to create a buffer, and there's all these modern courses, and the clubhouse is nowhere near the first tee or the 9th green or the 10th tee or the 18th green, and that's a missed opportunity. I'm definitely I'm into clubhouse architecture, because I think I see probably just get it wrong, and we're guilty of retreating to the interior, into it's the climate controlled comforts of air conditioning, 78-inch TV on the wall, and you've lost the chance to be on the porch. I'm a non-resident member of Marion, places I absolutely love, and they're famous for the proximity of the terrace to the first tee. It's about 4 paces.
Yeah, and Richie Ramsey talks about the cutlery jingling when you're on the first tee, and that creating a special feeling.
Fascinating. It's fascinating. And I love how the 18th green, you can chase the ball through the 18th green at Lytham and St. Anne's and have it, finish stymie to the edge of the clubhouse. So to me, the project, I see the holistic approach to the project. You don't let the clubhouse, the built environment and its architecture be an afterthought. Don't be as thoughtful about that. Clubhouse and the built environment should complement the golf. It should be, to me, there's almost like you rate a course on a 10-point scale. But I think it's more like, and the clubhouse built environment on a 10-point scale, and then the sort of culture and vibe. And like, to me, I'm always, these projects, I'm in the eternal pursuit of a project that sort of racks up 30 points. And where there's no demerits, where everything was thought through, the unintended consequences were anticipated, where there's no eyesores and sight lines, and there's, it can be done. This is what I take away from Mark Parson, is an obsessive kind of concept of truly getting it right, trying to really, and not as in his, he loved to frame stuff more. I'm definitely, I have different opinions about certain things, but the idea is that do everything you can in the best way possible to make the experience, to control the experience, that it's to have the golfers do what you intended for them to do, which is to enjoy your course and naturally come off the last green and have the logistics of everything be really well thought out, because you only improve the project. It only makes it more exciting. I joke the difference between Ohoopee and Seminole, you have to flee the property at 5:45 because captains of industry have to flee the grounds. No one's allowed at Seminole at 6 o'clock.
Is that right?
Like, oh yeah, it's an ancient rule that goes back to when staff at the club used to then go and kind of cater and work at the members' houses for serve cocktails and big drinks and serve dinner at their houses.
No way.
Bye. And at Ohoopee at 5:45 or 6 o'clock, when you're coming in after your second 18 of the day, you're sitting down to a rock, to an Adirondack chair on the clubhouse porch around a fire with your group or your two groups, the 8 of you, and the day only gets better. You're going to have sit around the fire for an hour and a half, go shower. They'll ring the dinner bell at 7:30, and then a sort of group-oriented family-style dinner at 7:30, and then back out onto the patio after dinner till midnight, and then a short walk back to your cabin, 100 yards or in some cases in the basement, the burrow. I mean, that, and then having sort of 32 or 36 or 40 golfers on site and everyone kind of mingling and hanging out together, that's an experience you can't get.
Yeah, it makes it so much better, doesn't it? I mean, the guys that...
It does.
The guys from Blackwell came recently,
everyone
they
can
loved
play
it.
as many holes as they wish. And, there's nothing else. There's nowhere else you'd rather be. You're never, from the moment you arrive to when you leave, you're never in a cart. You're not shuttled anywhere. You don't have to... the campus is all within a sort of 5-acre area. The range tee, the range barn, the putting green, the clubhouse, the cabins. There's something really great about that. And so getting that right is completing is a critical second half of the project. And so I do have a bias towards smaller clubhouses. I'm a big wraparound porch guy. I love covered and uncovered areas. Really try to induce people to be outside. I'm really into this concept of the first tee and the 18th green, creating an element of feeder for people as they watching approach shots or tee shots. An opportunity for people to sort of, follow the group in and shout to them and see where the match stands. That's something that is just, to me, an essential component. I'm definitely another project I'm involved in this case, I didn't find the land. I was brought in to advise, but this will resonate with your audience. Michael Arrighetti, this Yale guy, he's in New York. He's got a project in southern Georgia called Fall Line, and it's on the same scene of sand. It's the Fall Line sand dunes, which is the ancient seashell from 65 million years ago, from the Cretaceous period. The T-Rex roamed the earth. There's a seam of sand that runs through the American Southeast from Columbus, Georgia, through Macon, through Augusta, Georgia, through Columbia, South Carolina, and all the way up into North Carolina, and includes Pinehurst.
Wow.
And everything underneath it was once underwater. and this was the ancient beachhead. And Pinehurst and Tree Farm are part of it, and this Fall Line project. These are upland sand dunes, fascinating, outward-looking views. And they've hired, it's a 36-hole project with Ogilvy, Cocking, and Mead. And the West course there, which will be the longer, more championship course, is going to be done stylistically like a Melbourne sandbelt. They are sort of experts in the Melbourne sandbelt solution. And then the East course there is going to stylistically emulate the London Heathlands. And so it's going to be more of like Bolton Park and Simpson, Abercrombie, and it's going to have kind of like tops and the bunkers are they're going to have sort of native vegetation on the brows, whereas the West course will have that gorgeous flash sand that's going to
cuts into the bunker. Yeah.
So the two courses are going to be fascinating. That's a great project. They're very talented. Ashley, Mike Hocking and Ashley Mead are, it's not close to home for them, but it's a terrific routing. And when you do like Baltusrol and Wingfoot, when you do these 36-hole projects with the same architect planned at once, you can really kind of have the two courses mingle or co-mingle. So the East and the West will have there's going to be sort of areas where the two courses are kind of crossing over each other in a cool way. They're not, the bulk of them will be East and West, but there's going to be parts where you can kind of like, they mix together. It'll be pretty cool. Fascinating ground.
Awesome.
There's going to be.
I don't know how you fit all this in, Colin. I'll be honest. I mean, you must not sleep. I mean, you're coaching until 2 days ago. You're coaching a tier 1 side of players. And you seem to be running about a dozen golf developments. And you've got golf on the brain 24/7. I mean, I just don't know how you do it. As a parting gift, if I was to push you on a few clubhouses that really stick in the mind, a few that
go ahead. Yeah.
Go on. If you could pick a few that really stick in your mind, what would they be?
So I know it's interesting. Like, Shinnecock is obviously a famous clubhouse. It's iconic. It's Sanford White. The irony is, if you look at the slideshow I created, it's just a garden variety clubhouse from that era, and it's famous because it's out of famous championship links, and it's also famous because it survived and didn't burn. I should tell you. So, I once tried to. I tried to make a move, an unsolicited move on a golf course in Illinois that was owned by the Elks, Langford Moreau course from 1926. And it's a gorgeous old course, an hour and a half from Chicago, that had a dreadful clubhouse that was built in the 1960s that looks like, something like classic Soviet, Cold War, something right out of Stalingrad.
Stucco.
And I wanted to find examples of historic vintage sort of wood-framed clubhouses with a heavy, accent on porches on these covered areas. I wound up finding on eBay, Google searches for images turned up these eBay listings of postcards, and you could just you could nick them from the listing and add them to a slideshow. And I think I had a slideshow. I got carried away in like the summer of 19. I probably had 140 images in the slideshow. It's just, I didn't touch it, but it was. And then in March of 2020, right as COVID shut everything down, and I was recalled from Florida with the team, and my kids were at the beginning of a 2-week spring break for their school. And like everyone, we were at the sort of early days of a new reality. Every night after my daughters finally went to bed, for some reasons that are beyond me, I would go to my computer, and each night I would start finding more images of clubhouses. And each night I would add 25 to 50 new images to the slideshow. And every time I found a beautiful image, it sparked joy. It was like an antidepressant. And within a few months, I think there was 1,000 images. And I've since added to it another 500.
Where does this sit? This should have public access now. This should be.
It is. I'll send it to you to post. And what it is it is the most comprehensive list of precedents of historic clubhouses and golf hotels imaginable that anyone, myself included, but any new projects, any club thinking of renovating its clubhouse or tearing it down or replacing it, or a new project thinking of building a new one, here is your comprehensive list of every conceivable type of clubhouse. So don't say you didn't. Don't say you didn't have access. You have no excuse for building a bad modern clubhouse these days. You've, at least at a minimum, you should draw inspiration from it. And so it's a bit of a useful tool. I do love sharing it. I do love going through it. And then anytime a different project comes up, I kind of know where they are. I can find precedents from it in which to share and to download and share specific to a certain project. Or at a minimum, if you're going to do a deep dive and I can quickly find all the historic clubhouses from Texas that at least in some context of what you're doing. And I love it. So, and it tells a story. It tells a story that until the modernists, until Le Corbusier, in 1930, I don't know if there was an ugly building in the United States of America. Everything just followed the classic, rules of architectural proportion and of, ever since the Renaissance and the sort of going all the way back to Rome and ancient Greece. And now I don't understand why a good new clubhouse is almost an exception to the rule. It's almost by luck. To me, it's just depressing how underwhelming so many modern clubhouses are.
They're always covered in glass. They're always covered in glass, balustrades, light colored wood everywhere. And they don't always.
And I get codes, and I get that there aren't sort of armies of Italian immigrant artisans to do stonework and woodwork, and I get it, but come on, there's shame on anyone who builds a bad clubhouse these days.
But it's function, isn't it? So much of it is about these things being functional. I mean, I've obviously I've got to send you some pictures of the Blackwell clubhouse. I need to get you to Blackwell. I'm desperate to show you Blackwell because I think you will fall in love with it. But you go when you visit a lot of clubs, you see that, the old clubs where they've done nothing to their clubhouse, it usually perfectly encapsulates their club in some sort of roundabout way, whether it's Church Stretton or Dunbar's a good example. It's got curtains that, you'd put in your nan's house, in 30, 40 years ago. And but it's so brilliantly authentic to the club. And I know that's a club that's thinking it might move its clubhouse because they might do some stuff with their land there. And you think, I really hope they don't do a big, glass clubhouse that sits there with all the sort of modern trappings. I think, there's it is a shame. Anyone that goes near these things, you think you can completely upend the vibe and the culture at that club just by changing the way a clubhouse sits, the way that the people move through the rooms, the wood. Porth Call is just an outrageously good clubhouse. The creak of the floor. I mean, you'll know it. I'm guessing you've been there a few times. The creak of the floor when you go through those saloon doors, and the locker room, and you can see the waves lapping up. It's absolutely the most magical experience ever. And you think, God,
you can't recreate that.
No, you can't. You can't. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. They change stuff. Someone thinks it's a good idea because they want to have more glass so they can see out, or they want to have bigger lockers so they can put a trolley bag. And you're missing the point here. You're totally missing the point.
Right. You're absolutely right. It's hard. hold it back till I'm in progress. But it's like you never get it back. I think Walton Heath, is thinking about relocating this clubhouse, and then they're sort of held to these sort of, permitting codes that it be a carbon neutral building, and it'll be steel and glass, and it's almost like they don't even have a choice. You're limited in your option to an extent. So I spend as much time obsessing about trying to find a site that can yield an old looking course as we can, sort of looking for precedent in those, like you saw in those postcards for High Grove, just trying to borrow from the historic press, the sort of vernacular of the area, trying to, again, getting people outside, getting them on the porch, getting them adjacent to the golf. That only improves the joy. It makes it more exciting. You don't regret it if you get it right. It's an asset. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity, and if you don't do it, it's a missed opportunity.
Colin, I'm mindful I've taken you for nearly 2 hours. I could go forever, but we won't. 2 hours, only 2 days after sort of semi-retiring from the Yale job, and you must have other things that you need to do today. I'm hoping this won't be the last time we get you onto the podcast either, because I think there's scope in a few more discussions. I would love to get you to do an eclectic 18. I think an eclectic 18 that could keep you up for months on end there, and I don't think you'd get any sleep.
Watch this.